Hello and welcome to the Game Theory Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Vecenie. We are presented by CLNS Media. Today on the show, we've got good friend of the program, Chris Stone, on. We're going to talk about some potential NCAA Tournament prospect matchups that have us pretty excited going in. We're literally going to go right down the bracket and talk about everything that has us thrilled with the NCAA Tournament here. So how's it going, Chris?
It's going really well. Excited that the tournament's finally here.
Yeah, I mean, I got a chance to see Red Sparrow last night, so that's where I'm at in terms of excitement.
That's pretty good. I have a hot take, which is that I don't know that I've been to a movie theater in 5 years, so I'm like
5 years
Twitter movie discussion. Yeah, it's been forever.
Oh my god!
I don't have the attention span. It's not my thing.
Okay, I can understand that then. So you watch movies at home and then are on your computer.
Occasionally, yeah.
I can see that.
Not a big movie guy.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking to someone who worked in Hollywood, so I guess I just assume everyone's a big movie guy.
Yeah, I get it. I realize I'm definitely the odd one out here.
Yeah. Let's go on ahead. Let's just kind of jump into this. So when you saw the bracket, what were just your initial reactions from an NBA draft perspective before we really kind of break down into detail what we're excited about?
I think the thing that sticks out is just some of the potential matchups that could come up down the line. So in that sense, the possibility of Michigan State Duke happening again, where hopefully Marvin Bagley doesn't get poked in the eye and miss the entirety of the game. Obviously, Kentucky-Arizona sets up as a big matchup. So I think that the committee did a favorable job for people who have an interest in watching NBA prospects by setting up some of these potential matchups down the line where we could get games with a ton of NBA prospects in them.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that I'm most excited about as well. Whenever we get down to the Final Four, I think we're going to have a really good chance to get some really fun matchups. The Sweet 16, for instance, could be really fun if DeAndre Ayton ends up having to go against Virginia's defense, just to see how Virginia kind of deals with such a behemoth. But before we get there, I want to point out that this podcast is going to be sponsored by RX Bar. Let's jump in and talk about the South region, which features our number one team in the tournament, Virginia. Virginia, no one's excited about them playing UMBC, but we do have some exciting prospects on Virginia as a whole, I think, that are worth pointing out very quickly.
Yeah, I certainly think that's true. DeAndre Hunter is definitely the most interesting prospect for them from my perspective, 6'7", kind of combo forward wing who can really defend at a high level and has the experience of defending in a team system that I think a lot of players in college don't necessarily get. I think it'll be super interesting to watch how he progresses over the course of the NCAA tournament because I think he's made some strides offensively in recent games, even though he's not scoring a ton of points. There are kind of these flashes that suggest that there might be something there that we otherwise haven't seen.
Yeah, he's the first real matchup nightmare combo forward that they've had in a while. Justin Anderson was an All-American, but he was more of a 3-and-D type even in college, right? He rarely took advantage of mismatches in the high post or took advantage of low post opportunities. I think that DeAndre Hunter is a very big reason why I'm high on this Virginia team this year, just because he gives them something different that they haven't had in a while.
Yeah, I think that's true. One of the things that I always kind of think about when looking at teams in the NCAA tournament is players that you would be afraid of because they do something different than other people do. And Hunter certainly fits that mold just because he's such a different player than you would find against most of these teams. Kyle Guy and Ty Jerome are two terrific college guards, but I don't know that they're necessarily terrifying individual matchups. And I think DeAndre Hunter, kind of like you said, is potentially turning into that given some of his improvements.
Yeah, and the second matchup here, Creighton and Kansas State, I think is probably a little bit more interesting to talk about just because we're going to get a matchup of two of the best two-way guards, in my opinion, in the country, one of whom has gotten that publicity this year in Kyrie Thomas, the other of whom, in Barry Brown, I don't think has actually gotten that publicity because he is just in Kansas State and Bruce Weber teams are boring and there's not really much else to say about them,
Yeah, I certainly think that's true. We also should mention that this is the Marcus Foster revenge game.
Oh, yeah,
that's
right.
Kind of pushed out the door at Kansas State and is now at Creighton. So I'm super interested to see how that interaction gets by. Yeah, Barry Brown is definitely an underrated guy, gets to the rim at a high rate. kind of facilitates that offense. I actually am most intrigued on Kansas State by Dean Wade, who I think is a future NBA prospect, someone who can really space the floor, make some plays, passes it pretty well, shoots 40% plus from three. He's someone who I don't think will obviously enter the draft this year, but he is someone who I think as a senior next year will be super intriguing. The question, of course, is he was held out at the last game of the Big 12 tournament with a foot injury, and supposedly is going to be fully healthy for the NCAA tournament, but I don't know if that's confirmed yet.
So yeah, Dean Wade to me is a pretty big matchup problem for Creighton in this game, and I agree with you. I think he is going to be an NBA prospect down the road. He ended up on the first team All Big 12, correct?
Yeah, he took Mobamba's spot.
Right. So 63% true shooting percentage at 44% from deep, 75% from the line. He's gotten a lot tougher too, I would say, over the course of his Kansas State career. And that is, I think, a very important aspect that is going to help him maybe make the transition to the NBA. I don't think he's ever going to be more than like a top 60 prospect, to be honest. But I do think that he's at least worth mentioning. Kyrie Thomas is the best prospect in this game. I have him in the top 25 right now, as I have had all season long. Him against Barry Brown is just going to be such a fun little game within a game if they end up guarding each other. I can see Kansas State deciding to sick Barry Brown on Marcus Foster. But if I'm Creighton, I'm sicking Kyrie Thomas on Barry Brown.
I think that's 100% true. This is one of those matchups that you get in the NCAA tournament where you get the really good current NBA prospect against the really good college player. And those battles, I think, are pretty interesting from a scouting perspective, even if, Barry Brown isn't necessarily a high-level NBA prospect. Thomas is going to have a tough time guarding him. One of the questions, I think, with Thomas is, does he have the ability to stay in front of quicker guards who can get to the rim at a high rate? And he's going to have a challenge against Brown in that situation.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there. Let's move on. Let's talk about Kentucky and Davidson. So Kentucky has like a million prospects, right? I mean, Shea Alexander right now is my number one prospect on Kentucky. I've got him at number 11 on my draft board. I've got Kevin Knox at number 14. There's also PJ Washington. The resurrection of Wenyen Gabriel's draft stock. I think I'm the only person who still has a plot on Wenyen Gabriel Island. Hamidou Diallo is a person who exists as well. Jared Vanderbilt may or may not play in the second weekend of the NCAA tournament. Doesn't look like he's going to be able to go this weekend. Also, Nick Richards exists as well. I guess that where you have to start here is the Peyton Aldridge matchup, because Peyton Aldridge can cause a lot of problems for PJ Washington and Wenyen Gabriel and all of the athletic, somewhat inexperienced Kentucky front court players.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Aldridge is a floor spacing kind of 4 or 5 guy who can pull those guys away from the basket and put them into some perimeter situations that they're potentially not used to. I think that this is probably a situation where Kentucky wishes they would have Jared Vanderbilt. It sounds like he's definitely not playing the first weekend of the tournament.
Yep.
And so that's going to put them in a more difficult position in terms of being able to defend him. Can PJ Washington stick with him on the perimeter, assuming that they go with kind of the Washington-Gabriel front court that we've seen them using and take Richards out? I think that's, from a who's going to win the game perspective, probably the most important question in that contest. And I think Davidson has a reasonable chance of winning that game.
Yeah, I agree with you. Davidson is as hot as any team in the country right now. They have won 8 of their last 9 games coming into this NCAA tournament. They're a very strong 12 seed. My big question, too, is how big does Davidson play? Do they try and go small with Aldridge at the 5? Or do they do their typical thing where they play Will McGarity and have him match up size-wise with what Kentucky is going to bring to the table? I also want to point out another guy here who I think is a vastly underrated player in college basketball and is going to be an NBA prospect in the future, and that's Kellen Grady on Davidson. 62% true shooting percentage, 38% from 3, 62% two-point shooting percentage. He is a very, very real prospect, I think, long-term.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how he develops there. Obviously, we don't get a ton of NBA prospects out of Davidson and don't get a ton of chances to see them against high-level competition, so it'll be interesting to see him, kind of face off against this Kentucky line.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to have some real length that they can throw at him. They'll throw Shea Alexander at him. They'll probably try and throw Hamidou Diallo at him. I cannot see that being successful given the issues that Diallo has had this year defensively, especially off the ball, which is where Kellen Grady excels. I mean, a very real question here is, What do we think of Hamidou Diallo's draft stock right now? Because I don't think he's a first-round pick. Like, I'm straight up at that point.
When I did a big board last week, I almost left him off of the top 60 prospects that I did. I think I kind of included him ceremoniously as the number 60 prospect. If you ask me, like, what does Hamidou Diallo do well currently, I'm not sure that I have an answer to that. He's someone athletes. He athletes. He jumps, he runs, he occasionally gets out in transition, but it's not clear that he can actually dribble when he has the ball in transition. He is not someone I am particularly high on, and is not someone that if I were running an NBA front office would be excited about taking a chance on in the draft at all.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I totally agree with you. I think that where I struggle with him is that he doesn't apply that athleticism to the basketball floor. That's one thing that I talk about regularly, is applying your athleticism to the floor, and I don't think he does that all that well. We'll get a chance to talk about Kevin Knox and Shea Alexander a little bit later on as we move through the South region, but let's go on ahead. Let's move on really quickly. Arizona against Buffalo is going to be your 4-13. This one doesn't really intrigue me all that much from an NBA perspective, just because, I mean, Arizona is really good. They don't really play all that well together, but Buffalo doesn't really seem to me to have the athleticism, size combination to really be able to cause Arizona issues.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I saw some of the Arizona media. I was getting a little riled up this afternoon because some of the Buffalo players were talking up their chances in this game because they have quick guards that can move on the perimeter, and they were kind of calling out DeAndre Ayton's ability to handle himself in pick and roll. So I think that'll be probably the most interesting thing.
That's a really bad idea, by the way.
I 100% agree. But that's their game plan. They've already made that public, apparently, that their intention is to put Arizona's big men in pick and roll and see if they can guard them. And I think that probably ends poorly, but from a prospect perspective, I suppose it might be a good chance to get a look at how well Ayton defends on the perimeter, which, spoiler alert, is pretty good.
Yeah, game plan, piss off DeAndre Ayton does not seem like a really great strategy.
Nope.
This team does have Wes Clark, who was at Missouri for a few years. The rest of this team is, as you mentioned, some quick guards like CJ Massenberg, Devontae Jordan. They're all fine players, but I'd just be surprised to see them really cause Arizona a ton of issues. They're a good team, don't get me wrong, but I don't really have too much interest in this matchup at this stage. Let's move on. Let's talk about Miami and Loyola Chicago. So Miami, we're going to get another look at Lonnie Walker, and we're going to get a look at him playing against an elite-level defense in Loyola Chicago that is in the top 25 according to Ken Palm's adjusted defensive efficiency rating.
Yeah, I'm super interested to see how this game goes. If I were putting together a bracket pick, I actually think I would like Loyola Chicago in the upset here.
Agree.
I think that I don't know that Miami as a team is disciplined enough to deal with an actual quality, a defense the quality of Loyola. And I think that some of the problems that Lonnie Walker has as a prospect in terms of his individual ability to create offense for himself is something that a good defense can kind of expose. Walker does his best work kind of in spot-up situations, attacking off the bounce there against closeouts.
Yep. And
I don't know that he's going to be in his best position to succeed against this particular defense.
What do you think of Lonnie as a prospect right now? Where are you out on him? For reference, I have him like somewhere in the top 20 right now. I'm not entirely clear where he's going to fall in my update, though.
Yeah, I have him somewhere around 15. I think that that's largely a product of kind of how I feel about the 12 to 30 range. I don't really like that range too much in this particular draft. And Walker's someone to me who I think, because of his athleticism, because of his shot making, has some upside in there, but he's not someone that I'm particularly in love with.
Yeah, I think I agree with you there. Loyola Chicago doesn't really have any prospects, but they have a lot of really smart, disciplined, older players. Andre Jackson, Marcus Towns, Clayton Custer was the Missouri Valley Conference Player of the Year. Dante Ingram can really knock down shots. Wouldn't be a surprise at 6'6" to see him maybe get a look down the road in the NBA a little bit. But this is just a really, really good team that Porter Moser has on his roster right here. So let's go on ahead. Let's move on to Tennessee. Tennessee has some guys that they're playing Wright State, by the way. They have some guys that fit the modern NBA in an interesting way, but I don't know if they have quite enough game.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. The most obvious one there, I think, is probably Admiral Schofield, 6'5", 238, kind of multi-positional defender, really tough guy, can rebound on the defensive boards, can shoot threes, looks like a linebacker who chucks up, plenty of three-pointers. He's probably the most interesting prospect. Grant Williams is a little bit interesting, I suppose. Beyond that, there's not necessarily anyone I'm in love with. I know Yves Pons gets a lot of love, but he hasn't really shown it yet this year. Yeah, right. Doesn't play.
The other guy who gets a little bit of love is Kyle Alexander. He's a 6'11", floor or rim protecting defensive player from Canada. I mean, he's fine to me. He's not this amazing level prospect, just given where the NBA is going as an overall league where it's so difficult to make it from the perspective of being a big man. It's so hard. The margin for error does not exist anymore. So he's a junior. It wouldn't surprise me if he ended up on draft boards next year, but I'm not quite there with him to where I'm going to have him in my top 100. Another guy that I think is worth noting is Jordan Bowden, 6'5" wing, 39% from three this year, but doesn't really have the kind of bounce to finish inside that you need and that you're hoping for, but he draws a ton of fouls, so it's at least very interesting.
Yeah, that at least makes someone interesting. I think from a prospect perspective, this is probably one of the least interesting games in the first round to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I'm with you there. Let's go on ahead and move on. Let's talk about Nevada and Texas. This one is very interesting to me from a whole lot of perspectives. Basically, the Mohamed Bamba game against, I guess the way to put it is a very small, sleek, athletic Nevada team who isn't going to try and match them size-wise, but is going to try and cause them issues with their athleticism.
Yeah, it sounds like Mohamed Bamba intends to play and is getting close to 100% after the toe injury. It's basically all bigs versus all guards, right, in this particular one. So I think it'll be interesting to see kind of where Bamba's at in terms of defending away from the basket. And I think it'll be interesting to see whether or not he can take advantage of his size against a lot of smaller players. Texas doesn't do a lot with Bamba in terms of getting him post-ups, in part because he's not particularly good at them. So his ability to take advantage of his size in this game is something that I think is interesting because we'll be able to see how far along he is in terms of punishing, what would be switches at the NBA level. I'm not really sure that it's there yet, but I think we'll get a good feel for it against a good Nevada team.
Yeah, I think that it's going to be interesting to see how he does against Jordan Caroline, because Jordan Caroline, for people who aren't really familiar with him, it's Simeon Rice, the old Tampa Bay defensive end, who is probably going to be like a Hall of Fame NFL player's son. He's built like Simeon Rice. He's 6'7", 240 pounds of just pure muscle, and he plays with that football mentality, that energy to embrace contact. He wants to get to the foul line. He wants to cause all sorts of havoc on the basketball floor, and that's not something that Mohamed Bamba tends to deal with all that well whenever I've seen him play. Caroline's going to be able to get up under him. He's going to be able to get into his body. It wouldn't surprise me if Mohamed Bamba had some foul problems in this game.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. Are there other players on Texas that you think are interesting?
Well, hold on real quick. Let me talk about Caleb Martin real quick, because I think he's probably my next favorite prospect in this game. 41% from three, just a knockdown shooter at 6'7". Can create a little bit off the bounce and spot ups as well. Are you a big Caleb Martin guy?
I don't know that I'm a huge fan in terms of NBA prospects, but he's certainly a terrific college player.
Yeah, I think that's where I'm at. I have him in my top 100, and it wouldn't be surprising for me to see him make a NBA roster at some point, but that's more what you're talking about. You're talking about a back-end player at the end of the day. Kerwin Roach is interesting to me from an NBA perspective on Texas. I mean, he's athletic, he defends, he can pass a little bit, but he turns it over quite a bit. He's not quite where he needs to be as a shooter, even if that is improving a little bit. He really does, to me, still need another year very clearly.
Yeah, I think he's a prospect who's going to take another year. I think anybody on Texas other than Bamba is due for another year of college basketball. But Roach, to me, is really interesting. Like you said, super high-level athlete, terrific defender, probably one of the best defenders in the Big 12, even though he didn't make the All-Big 12 defensive team, which is kind of a little ridiculous. He's someone I think is interesting.
Let me make the case here, though, because, who are you going to take off of that team? Because we're both in agreement that Zaire Smith is very good, right?
Zaire Smith's really good. Javon Carter obviously has to be on the team.
Right. I think Barry Brown made it. Barry Brown's really good.
Yeah.
It's hard tough to get him on there.
The Big 12 is a tough league in terms of putting people in five-man pockets. They should just go like the Big East and make it 6 or something.
Yeah.
Fix my problems.
The other guy I want to talk about real quick is Jericho Sims. I'll be interested to see if he plays a bit. He is a pogo stick, man. That guy is bouncy as all hell. Blocks shots here and there. Really rebounds the basketball when he's on the floor and finishes above the rim. So I don't know if he might be a guy that I can see matching up well with what Nevada is going to do.
Yeah, he's certainly a bit on the tougher side compared to Bamba. Sims, I think, is a super interesting prospect for next season. Like you said, really bouncy, gets up, has some of the most insane highlight reel dunks that you could find this year in terms of catching alley-oops, and is someone I think is worth tracking.
Cincinnati, Georgia State actually features a really interesting draft prospect matchup here because we're going to get Jacob Evans and Gary Clark and that suffocating Cincinnati defense against a Georgia State team that features DeMarcus Simmons, who is a really, really, really athletic player who can get into the lane whenever he wants. He can knock down shots from 15 feet. I would say he's still not comfortable from 3, and he can really pass it. He does everything for that team, and I'm interested to see in the way Cincinnati kind of attacks defending him.
Yeah, I definitely think that's the most interesting question. Do you think Cincinnati's defense has faced a player like him of his kind of athletic caliber this year? I'm kind of running through their schedule, and I think the answer is no.
Aaron Holiday, they played?
Yeah.
Not quite as athletic, but he's quick. I mean, Chris Chioza's quick, but doesn't really have that same kind of like bounce, that athleticism, that ability to really attack. Rob Gray is another one. They've played good guards this year, but nothing that kind of meshes that like power athleticism with quickness mold that Simmons does.
Yeah, so that'll be super interesting to see how they, kind of combat that. I don't know who they will put on him defensively. I mean, their best defender individually is probably Jacob Evans, but I don't know that they have the ability to – I don't know that Evans can handle being on someone as quick as Simons.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, they are so impactful in terms of the way they play help defense. They play like that amoeba matchup zone a lot of the time where it's going to be really difficult for Simmons to really get into the paint when he wants. Their goal is to cut off penetration, just full stop. They switch a lot of like screens and everything. So I don't really think it's like a one-man job to shut him down in Cincinnati's case. But it's going to be interesting to watch. Jacob Evans is the best prospect, I would say, but Gary Clark, another really, really good prospect that I will have in my top 100, continue to have in my top 100. But he could really help himself by showing that he can consistently knock down threes in the same way he has throughout the course of the season.
Yeah, I mean, with him, it's just a volume question, right? He's only taken 63s this year. It's just something you want to be able to see over a larger sample, and doing so in March when kind of all eyes are on you is a good way to convince people.
Let's talk about kind of the top of this region here real quick. What are the matchups you're most looking forward to in the future in the top half?
The most obvious one, I think, is just Kentucky-Arizona from a volume perspective. But the one that you mentioned earlier, the possibility of Arizona facing off with Virginia, is super interesting. Since DeAndre has kind of taken to playing down low, not floating around the perimeter quite as much now, he would be in a really interesting position against Virginia that almost always double teams the post. So we would get a chance to see what I think is one of Ayton's most underrated traits, which is passing. We would get a chance to see a lot of that, I think, if he played Virginia. Yeah,
I agree with you. I think that's the matchup I would most look forward to. Kentucky and Arizona is obviously interesting. I would say that Creighton against Virginia, to see Kyrie Thomas against that defense would be very interesting. In the bottom half, there's just precious few matchups that I'm looking forward to, I would say. Like, there's no like super high level game that I can point to and say this is going to be really, really fun.
Yeah, I think perhaps the most interesting would be if Lonnie Walker is able to get past that Loyola Chicago defense, if we got to see him against Cincinnati and how he handled some of their defensive alignments. But like you said, it's slim pickings down there.
Yeah. Before we move on, though, I want to tell you about RX Bar. RX Bar is a whole food protein bar. What does that mean? Their bars are made with 100% whole ingredients. They want to be transparent and upfront with their customers, which is why they label the core ingredients on the front of the package and the ingredients that make up texture and taste on the back. Beyond being a go-to snack that checks off a number of nutritional boxes, RX bars actually taste delicious. They found that creating a bar from real whole food ingredients actually tastes better than anything else that's out there. They don't need fillers, additives, chemicals, or added sugar. They started in 2013. They called BS on protein bars. They couldn't find one out there that wasn't full of artificial ingredients, so they set out to create a bar with a few simple, clean ingredients where every ingredient serves a purpose. Their core ingredients do all the talking. It's simply like eating 3 egg whites, 2 dates, and 6 almonds with no BS involved. Whether you like sweet or savory, chocolate or fruit flavors, there's an RX bar for you. They come in 11 delicious varieties. There's no added sugar, no artificial colors, artificial flavors, preservatives, or fillers. The egg whites are there for protein, the dates are there to bind, and the nuts are there for texture. I enjoy RX bars. I've gotten quite a few different boxes of them. The mint chocolate chip is really, really good. I have an offer for you on this. If you visit rxbar.com, I can get you 25% off on your first order. Visit rxbar.com/game theory and enter promo code game theory at checkout. That's rxbar.com/game theory and enter the promo code game theory at checkout. Chris, let's go on ahead. Let's move on to the West. This is the region that I will be covering at the NCAA tournament this year. We get Xavier in the first game. Are you interested in any prospects on Xavier?
Not terribly. Trayvon Blewett is probably the person who interests me most just because of his shot-making ability. Obviously, as a catch-and-shoot guy, but can come off a screen, shoot off of movement quite a bit. So I'll be interested to see how well he plays. He was one of the best players in the tournament last year, but that might be about it.
Yeah, I would point out long-term Najee Marshall, 6'7", 7-foot wingspan, 61% true shooting on the year, 58% from 2, 36% from 3. He's a guy where, Chris Mack's going to be mentioned for the Louisville job pretty heavily. So if Chris Mack stays there, I can see Najee Marshall playing a pretty big role for them when JP McCura and Trayvon Blewett depart. Blewett's the best guy here. I think he's definitely going to get a very real NBA chance just given his shot-making ability. But there are some concerns there in terms of what he's going to be able to bring defensively and athletically.
Yep, 100%.
I don't really think we need to talk about Texas Southern or North Carolina Central. I mean, do you have any Trey Jefferson hot takes?
I do not.
Okay, so let's move on. Let's talk Missouri and Florida State. This is probably – is this the most interesting first-round game from an NBA draft perspective?
Yeah, that sounds right to me. I think that's probably true, especially given the possibility that Michael Porter starts.
Yeah, like Michael Porter is a player who exists. He is a top 10 prospect, certainly. He played like shit in their SEC tournament game.
Okay, it really wasn't good.
No, it just did. Like, he really did not fit in what they were trying to do offensively. So it'd be interesting to me to see if, as Konzo reintroduces him in a way to what they want to do offensively, if he can start to adjust to his teammates and kind of make things happen. He'll likely start in this game because Jordan Barnett, their 6'7", 215-pound senior, is going to be out due to a DUI over the weekend. So, I mean, where are we at against the way Michael Porter is going to match up against a Florida State team whose defense is athletic but also not good?
Yeah, I think that the problem with Porter, right, is just a question of how well conditioned he is at this point. If he's in shape, it's tough to come back from such things. He, I think, is even admitted to not being at full strength, but he's going to get thrust into a real role here, it seems like, with Barnett out. I have questions about Porter long-term as an NBA prospect because I don't necessarily like the way that his game fits with the way the modern NBA is played, because I think he tends to like the ball in really inefficient shots, and that speaks to some of what you were just talking about in terms of his fit within Missouri's offense. You see him catching the ball in the mid-range a lot. The ball stops there while he waits and kind of sizes up the situation. But I do think it's going to at least be an interesting test of how far along he is in his recovery, even if Florida State's defense as a whole is not particularly good.
Yeah, I agree with you. They can present problems for him athletically. They're going to pressure you. They're going to, try and really get up in you. And he had some issues against Georgia in that SEC tournament game. Now, I mean, I think he's probably going to be fine. Like, I still have him as a top 6 or so prospect in this draft. I agree with the concerns that you have in terms of the way he tries to hunt out inefficient shots from time to time. Having said that, like, I'm ultimately fine with what he brings to the table. I think he can actually really just kind of get shots whenever he wants. In high school, we have a large sample of him really actually knocking them down at a very high level. So we'll see how much that translates to this game because, again, it's a matchup that he should be able to exploit, but I'm unclear if he's going to be able to do it.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Jonte Porter is also a very interesting prospect for a lot of reasons. I've been a little bit lower on him than many throughout the course of the season. He's been much better in recent weeks, though. I mean, his last 3 games, he's dropped 24, 19, and 20 points. He's had at least 7 rebounds in every one of those games. He's averaged 4 assists in every one of those games. I'm a big fan of what I've seen from him during that stretch, but his game presents a lot of interesting analytics versus scouting kind of discussions that I think are going to happen whenever he decides to declare.
I think that's exactly correct. He's, someone who can knock it down from outside. He's shooting 38% from 3. He's done that since high school. This isn't kind of a one-off situation. He's also a super skilled passer, can attack closeouts a little bit, but he's not the most exciting athlete. I think that's kind of putting it kindly, which means that he has some problems, particularly on the defensive end when he has to move around in ball screens, and I'm not sure how well that's going to translate to the defensive end. The other question I think on defense is that he's posting a really nice block rate this year, 7%, top 100 in the nation. I don't know that he's going to be able to block shots at the NBA level like he's been able to in college and high school.
I agree with that 100%. I mean, he is just not the kind of athlete whose numbers will translate to the NBA. Now, maybe he gets in better shape. He is the youngest NBA draft prospect that is in my top 50 right now. So maybe he can improve athletically. Maybe he can improve his body a little bit. But he has a very thick frame with 2 C's that scares me.
Yeah. I still think that given the kind of quality of this draft and the positions that we talked about earlier, if he were to declare this year, I think he would probably warrant a first-round pick. I don't know that he would necessarily go there, but he would warrant one in my mind just because the skill level is so high.
I think I agree with you. I think I'm at that point where I would have him in my top 30 as well. Any Cassius Robertson love?
Great shooter, not really sure what else he does.
Yeah, I think that's basically right, but I'm at the stage now where if you can really knock down pull-up jump shots, I'm basically going to think you have a chance.
Yeah, you got a shot.
Florida State, MJ Walker is probably their best prospect, but he's more of a long-term guy probably, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Ohio State versus Mike Daum features one of my favorite NBA draft prospect matchups of the entire first round. Mike Daum is, he's been a ridiculous player for 3 years now at South Dakota State. I think that the big question everyone has is, though, how does he deal with athleticism? How does he deal with really, really good high-level, high-major defenses? He's done it with mixed results so far in his career. He's going to get a hell of a matchup, though, with Ohio State and Keita Bates-Diop, because I would imagine that Ohio State is not going to give him the Caleb Wesson matchup all that often.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. Ohio State plays a little bit smaller, puts Keita Bates-Diop on him and puts him in some difficult situations. I think Mike Daum is, again, a player who's a terrific college player, can space the floor a ton, score in a variety of ways, but isn't someone with the athleticism necessarily to be a long-term NBA prospect, but is probably someone who will have, a professional basketball career in some capacity. Obviously, he's South Dakota State's best player. Keita Bates-Diop, Ohio State's best player, who I still continue to think is interesting, even though he's fallen off a little bit from where he was earlier in the season.
Yeah, I'm still very in on Keita Bates-Diop. I would say he's still... So I did do a top 5 players in the NCAA tournament for The Athletic, and I had him at 6. I did not end up putting him in, but he was my guy where I listed him in case Trae Young didn't make the NCAA tournament. So I'm still very high on him. He's a ridiculous player. He dropped 25 and 24 in his last 2 games with an average of 9 rebounds a night. He's so good, and he's actually really good defensively too. He can move his feet a little bit, not as great as you would hope there, but he's super long, and he blocks shots on the weak side of the rim. He doesn't turn it over, and he really rebounds the basketball. I'm a big fan of the way that he can not only knock down shots, but create his own shot too.
Yeah, absolutely. And he just fits so much of what the modern NBA wants these days, right? As kind of the versatile defender who can guard a couple of positions, fits into that combo forward slot, can knock it down from outside, create a shot on occasion. I don't know that he's someone who has tremendous upside in terms of potentially being a star in the league, but he seems like someone who should be, barring injuries or anything else, a consistent role player for a long time.
Yeah, I've got him like right around 20 on my board right now, but it'll be interesting to see the way he matches up with Mike Daum. That's really the only two guys that interest me on both of these teams, though.
Yep, I agree.
Gonzaga versus UNC Greensboro. I'm a big Gonzaga fan. I've talked at length about Killian Tilly and Rui Hachimura and, quite a few of the guys on the Gonzaga roster. Do you have any, strong opinions on them?
I don't have strong opinions on them. I think Killian Tilly is someone who could potentially improve his stack quite a bit, just being on a bigger stage and away from the West Coast where, only so many people are awake to watch them at night, because I think he's a really good player.
Lazy analysts.
I know, lazy analysts. It gets late. I go to sleep. But Tilly is super interesting. Really skilled big man. Obviously has some positional questions, some size questions, but I think he's someone who will benefit from being on a bigger stage.
68.2 true shooting percentage this year while averaging 13 points and 6 rebounds a night. Does a good job of using verticality at the rim. His feet are a little bit slower than what you would think they are whenever you watch him in person. Elijah Bryant for BYU got by him a little bit, but he still moves his feet well. He's still a very fluid athlete, a very smart basketball player, passes the ball really well. 50% from three. He can shoot it on the move at 6'10". That plays in the NBA.
Yep, that'll get the job done.
And then Rui Hachimura is a very, very interesting long-term prospect who still is trying to figure out a lot of the game. I talked to him after their win against BYU. He said that, he's still planning on being there next year, for sure, and we'll see where it goes from there. But I will be interested to see if he kind of blows up, if that can change.
Yeah, he certainly has the moments that you see where you're like, okay, that kid can definitely be a pro. He just hasn't necessarily put it all together on a consistent basis yet.
Yeah, he also just has moments where you're just like, why? What are you doing? Houston against San Diego State. This is an interesting game for some kind of fringy prospects. So Rob Gray is probably the first guy worth mentioning. He can really create his own shot at 6'3", but more of a 6'3" scoring guard, 6'2" scoring guard than a real lead guard.
Yeah, he's someone who can, like you said, create his own shot, but he doesn't shoot it particularly efficient, just 34% from three this season. Probably someone who will get a shot to play in the NBA, but probably not someone who will make a roster.
Yeah, I think they're actually going to lose this game, to be honest. San Diego State has been on fire recently. They've won 9 in a row. Devin Watson is their most highly used player for the most part, but Malik Pope has at least been interesting in his 4th year that Chad Ford certainly did not expect whenever Chad was still doing ESPN mock drafts. Matt Mitchell and Jalen McDaniels, though, are probably my 2 favorite long-term prospects on this team.
Yeah, that makes sense. A couple of young guys who have a bit more upside than Malik Pope does, not someone I'm particularly interested in. Those will be 2 interesting guys to track. Mitchell can shoot it a bit, big guy on the wing. McDaniels can handle himself inside. I haven't watched a ton of San Diego State this year, but those are 2 guys that are certainly worth tracking down the line.
Do you know how Malik Pope is the guy who always leaves you wanting more? Yeah. Jalen McDaniels is the guy who you look at and go, oh, that guy's getting everything that he can out of what he has. 65.5 true shooting percentage, 24% rebounding rate. He just plays so hard. I think that next year, it's not out of the question that we're talking about him as like a late first-round pick. I probably, I'm not predicting that necessarily. I'm just saying it wouldn't be a surprise.
That seems reasonable.
Yeah, Michigan against Montana. I'm not super interested in any of these guys. Mo Wagner's fine.
How dare you slander Mo's name like that?
Yeah, Mo's fine.
He's interesting. He can score a little bit, shoots it, does a lot of the things. In my big board last week, I called him a budget version of Lauri Markkanen, which I think is about what he is. And budget might be too much.
Yeah, I will say this. He's gotten a lot better defensively.
A ton.
Yeah, last year there were times where I thought you couldn't keep him on the floor defensively. This year, he's actually a decent-sized part of what is right now a top 5 defense in the country. I will say I am impressed with what he has done defensively. He's still not a shot blocker. His feet are still a little bit slow on the perimeter, but he gives a lot more effort than what he's given in the past, and he's a really good defensive rebounder now.
That's exactly right. One of the things that I think changed the most for him was his defensive rebounding. Just got tougher on the glass. I think his per 40 rebounds went up from like 7.5 to 10 this year, which is a huge jump to make from a sophomore to junior season.
Yeah, I would wonder if anyone has ever made the jump he's made as a defensive rebounding guy. 15.2 defensive rebounding rate as a sophomore, playing 59% of his team's minutes. 25.8 defensive rebounding rate as a junior, playing 63% of his team's minutes. That's really impressive to get to where you are there, that you can jump 10% in defensive rebounding rate.
Yeah, it's super impressive. And I think it's, like you said, one of the big reasons that Michigan's been able to make some strides on the defensive end. They're just able to end possessions more often than they were last year.
Yeah, and in terms of Montana, I mean, Ahmad Rory is fine. He'll at least cause some issues for Michigan, but I think Michigan probably wins this pretty easily.
Yeah, I think so too. The problem is that Xavier Simpson is a really good point guard defender.
Yeah, he's really, really good. Texas A&M against Providence. Where do you stand on Texas A&M? Because they're probably the most maddening team in the country for me.
Yeah, I mean, they're certainly one of the most disappointing. Obviously, some of that is a product of losing all of their guards over the course of the season, but I just don't think that the pieces fit together in any reasonable, fit. DJ Hogue is a small ball power forward who plays almost exclusively at the small forward for them. They have too many guys who can't shoot. Yeah, even plays two. Get him out there. But they just have too many big guys and not enough guys who can shoot to do the things that they want to do. I think that makes, their best NBA prospect, Robert Williams, really difficult to evaluate because he's playing in a role that he almost certainly will not play in the NBA.
Where are you at on Big Bob?
I'm not particularly high on Big Bob. I don't know that I trust his size to play full-time 5 in the NBA. I do think that the athleticism and the longer wingspan gives him an opportunity to do that as kind of a rim-running, shot-blocking big man, but he's not someone who I think has made particular skill developments since he's been a freshman, and that worries me a lot. Yeah,
I agree with you. He's basically a stagnated version of what he was last year. 2 for 30 in his career from 3 as well. You'd think at some point he'd probably stop taking them, but that has not yet happened.
They got to have somebody to space the floor there.
It's a good point. I guess he kind of does have to take them. 66% from 2-point range. Everyone knows he can finish way above the rim. The turnovers have actually gotten worse this year. Block rate has stayed about stagnant. He's the same guy, I think, as he was last year, and that scares me.
I agree.
Against Providence, I think Providence actually wins this game, and I'm going to be really interested in the way that Robert Williams defends the pick-and-roll heavy style of Providence, where Kai Cartwright is going to really force him into a lot of tough spots.
Yeah, Kyron Cartwright is another one of those, kind of experienced, kind of gatekeeper college guards who's going to put, these high-level NBA prospects in difficult positions in the NCAA tournament. Cartwright, when he's going, is one of the most fun guards in college basketball to watch. You can pull up off the dribble, get to the rim, kind of do it all out of those ball screen actions, and Ed Cooley loves to take advantage of those mismatches. So I think you're exactly right, and that's probably the place to watch Robert Williams in particular in this game.
Yeah, it was funny. I was talking to Brian Snow over the weekend. He was out in Vegas for the Pac-12 tournament, and he also had a sneaky take that Alpha Diallo has a chance to play in the NBA. 6'7", long wing. I get it.
Yeah, I mean, anybody who's 6'7", long, and somewhat athletic is going to get a look at some point, but given that he's shooting 21% from 3 this season, he's got a long ways to go.
Yeah, I'm with that. UNC and Lipscomb. I mean, should we just wait to talk about UNC like in the second section here? I mean, are we interested in any of these like secondary prospect matchups? I mean, like OSU and Gonzaga, if they both get there, at least strikes me as the most interesting in the entire region, but this is a weak region.
Yeah, it's a super weak region from a prospect perspective. I suppose you could say that if Missouri somehow beats Florida State, pulls off an upset of Xavier, and plays Gonzaga, you could get some interesting matchups in that situation, but I think that the likelihood of that occurring is pretty low. This region in my mind, both from a prospect perspective and a team quality perspective is by far the worst.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Let's talk real quick about North Carolina in terms of what matchups they could get. I mean, like, is Cam Johnson your favorite prospect on North Carolina?
I think after the ACC tournament, it might be Theo Pinson, to be honest. He was really aggressive off the bounce in the ACC tournament, was able to get to the rim a lot. He can make some plays for a wing, which is something that's rare for a player of his size, and I think he's a pretty quality defender. In terms of guys who have individually defended Marvin Bagley one-on-one this season, I think Theo Pinson has done about as good of a job as any just because of how willing he is to fight Bagley for position. So he's maybe the most interesting one to me because I think that he has kind of an outlier skill in terms of his playmaking ability as a wing, whereas Cam Johnson is just kind of like the big combo forward who can shoot it a little bit.
Yeah, none of these guys really are all that interesting to me.
Yeah, I mean, nobody really sets my alarm bells off, but
like I probably won't have any of them in my top 100.
I agree with that.
Let's go ahead and move on. Villanova against LIU, Brooklyn, or Radford. We'll talk about Villanova whenever we talk about some future matchups in the region, I think. But Mikal Bridges is obviously the name here. 7th overall prospect on my board. Jalen Brunson is a top 40 guy on my board as well. Any other interesting guys there for you?
I think that those two are pretty much it for Villanova at this point. I think that they have some guys who could potentially play their way onto boards next year, but nobody who's there yet.
Yeah, like Dante DiVincenzo is fine to me.
Yes.
More than he's like this amazing prospect. Virginia Tech, Alabama does strike me as a game that's going to be very fun from an NBA perspective, though. Colin Sexton going against a Virginia Tech team that really has struggled at times defensively this year. What do you think of that matchup?
Yeah, I'm really excited to watch Sexton play against Virginia Tech. I think he's going to have some opportunities to get out in transition. He's been really awesome this month. I wrote about him a little bit today. He's averaging 29.8 points, 4.7 assists per 40 minutes this month on a 68.3 true shooting percentage. He's made 10 of his 23s, and that just opens up his game so much because I think in terms of point guards in this class, I'm not sure that there's a better one in terms of actually just getting to the rim at a high rate. And I think he's going to be put in some interesting positions against a Virginia Tech defense that will probably let him get to the rim.
Yeah, I've got Colin Sexton number 8 on my board. He's been really, really ridiculous this month. I am still worried about the shooting from deep. I do think that's going to be a significant hindrance to the way NBA folks defend him.
Yes.
But I'm not sure it matters all that much right now.
Yeah, I mean, the question, right, is just can he bring the shooting along enough to make it a threat? And I think that the thing that March has showed us about him is what he can be when the shot is falling. And I think some of what we probably saw in February was what he is when the shot is not falling, which is a significantly less interesting version of what he is now.
Yeah, let's go on ahead. Let's talk about Virginia Tech here real quick. Nickeil Alexander-Walker is one of those players who, for me, the numbers look good. As a freshman, he was someone I had in my top 40 coming into the year. But if you watch him, they don't really match up with what you're seeing for the most part.
Yeah, the thing that sticks out the most, obviously, is that he's shooting 39% from three this year, which is super exciting. But I don't think that he's been the type of playmaker that he was billed as coming in, right? I think when the season started, people thought that he might be a little bit more of a combo guard than just a straight-up shooting guard, but he's got a negative assist-to-turnover ratio and hasn't really shown any ability to make plays and has some tendencies to get lost in the defensive end.
Yeah, like there are times where Buzz just like won't play him late in games because he just can't trust him. And that scares me a lot if I am an NBA team because he's just not the kind of athlete where you can project a lot of defensive improvement. Like he really needs to lock down on that end and give a ton of effort to make it.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's someone who will benefit from coming back for another year of college. Buzz is a good coach at developing some of those players. So if he has some defensive upside, I think that will eventually come out of him at Virginia Tech, but he's just not necessarily there yet.
Ahmed Hill is another guy that I'm at least interested in. 41% from three this year on over 150 attempts, 37% last year on over 150 attempts, 38% in his freshman season. 6'5", 210-pound wing. Doesn't really play enough defense for me, but he's at least going to get a look because of the shooting, I think.
Yep, anybody who can shoot deserves a little bit of a look.
And then the last guy here is Chris Clark. Came back from injury, struggled early in the season, I would say, but has been a little bit better over the course of, maybe I would say like the last 2 weeks, really, since the Duke game. I thought he was really, really good in the Duke game. I thought that he played well in the Notre Dame game that I saw, having to kind of deal with what Notre Dame brings you in space defensively. I like him more than I like Theo Pinson, and find them to be relatively similar prospects in terms of what they're going to bring at the NBA level as outlier playmakers at the 4 who also defend and struggle to shoot it a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's totally reasonable. Clark's a really good player. Certainly one of those guys that we just talked about is being able to make some plays as a small ball 4.
Yeah. Let's go on ahead. Let's move on to yet another relatively interesting under the radar matchup to me. West Virginia against Murray State. This would be weird under most circumstances, but Murray State has a pair of guards that I think are actually going to be fun to watch Javon Carter have to defend in Jonathan Stark and Ja Morant.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think that this is another opportunity, I guess, if he needs any more of them, for Javon Carter to kind of prove himself as a particular defender. I've come down a little bit on Carter over recent weeks because I think it's really difficult to see where he translates offensively in the NBA. He just does not have the ability to get to the line or to get into the paint at a high enough rate for me to be confident that he's going to play a role more than a spot-up shooter in the NBA. Now, it's a positive that he's still shooting 38, 39% from three-point range. He's done that over 2 seasons now, so I feel reasonably confident he'll be able to do that. But I think his role, the possibilities for his role have shrunken over the last maybe month and a half. Yeah,
like we'll talk about Devontae Graham at some point. Like I'm higher on Devontae Graham than I am on Javon Carter now, which is something I probably would not have guessed would have been the case in January, for instance. Ja Morant, I want to talk about really quickly. 6'3", 370 pounds, 12 points, 6 rebounds, 6 assists a game as a freshman at Murray State. He still can't shoot it. He does get to the line and does knock down free throws at a reasonable rate. He's at least interesting long-term for me as like a smaller school. I would bet that at some point he ends up in my top 100 over the course of the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. If he proves he can raise that 3-point percentage up anywhere near average, he'll be someone who, kind of hits radars pretty quickly.
Also, Jonathan Stark is a terrifyingly good scorer. 40% from 3 on over 250 attempts, many of which come off the dribble, 89% from the free throw line. My theory, again, anytime you can shoot it off the dribble and create your own shot, you have a chance.
Absolutely.
So let's move on. Let's talk about the 4-13 game in that region. Wichita State against Marshall. You're talking Landry Shamet against John Elmore is your big one there. John Elmore, it's hard to tell how interested we should be in him as a prospect just because of the scheme he plays in. Dan D'Antoni is obviously Mike D'Antoni's brother. They run very similar schemes in terms of what they're trying to do. Marshall is 24-10 this year. They've done a really, really good job of, I guess, accentuating the talent that they have within a modern offensive scheme, and they do it in a way that not enough college coaches do.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite things about college basketball over the last year and a half is Dan D'Antoni clowning reporters about analytics and whether or not he should be posting up more often. I think that that's terrific. This is a situation where I think Wichita State's just obviously more talented than Marshall is, and if Marshall's goal is to outscore them and get up and down, I think Wichita State's going to do that better. Shaq Morris is probably a difference maker in this game. I don't know that I think Shaq Morris is a long-term NBA prospect, but I'll say this. I think Shaq Morris gets an NBA look because he's become a real three-point shooter and pick and pop spots.
Aiden Panava is another guy that some analytical folks are into. I'm less inclined by him, I would say, just given the fact that whereas John Elmore is the one driving the action for Marshall, and I can understand where people are excited about him, Panava is more of a, kind of along for the ride guy. And that might be a little bit unfair because he is a very talented player. He blocks shots really well, but he's also like a 6'9", 210-pound like forward.
Yeah, he's not someone that I'm super interested in, but does put up terrific numbers in that system.
Yeah, Wichita State, too. Should we talk about Marcus McDuffie? He's a guy that I was more excited about early in the season than I have been later on, as he's gone through his season. He had the big game against SMU in late February, but other than that, it's been rough for him.
Yeah, I think he's really struggled to come back from the foot injury and hasn't really found his spot yet. Wichita State's doing a lot of things differently than they did last year when he benefited from playing almost exclusively as a small ball four, but this year they've had Rashard Kelly kind of break out as a senior versatile defender and rebounder, and that's pushed McDuffie into playing small forward more often, which is somewhere where I don't think his talents necessarily get taken advantage of to the maximum.
One final question here with Wichita State. Do we think they are dumb enough to try and run with Marshall?
They might, yeah. They like to get up and down and score points, so yeah, they might.
Because this defense is not good enough to deal with that, I don't think.
Oh, Wichita State's defense? No.
Yes.
Wichita State's defense is bad. It's a disaster.
I really think Marshall has a chance in this game just because of that. Marshall is a bad matchup for them offensively because Wichita does a shitty job of getting back in transition a lot of the time, and they just kind of don't really defend all that well off ball. They really struggle off ball. This is the kind of offense that can cause them problems.
Yeah, I agree. I think that this is going to put the question of whether or not Wichita State has a flip to switch on the defensive end to the test.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Florida against one of Bonaventure or UCLA. Let's talk about the Bonaventure-UCLA game first because it has one of my favorite prospects in the entire prospect matchups in the entire NCAA tournament. Jalen Adams against Aaron Holiday. Let's do a real quick rundown. I have Aaron Holiday now in my top 25 prospects. Jalen Adams, I've had right around the bottom end of my top 100 all year. Do you like both of those prospects? Are you as high on them as I am?
I'm not quite as high on Aaron Holiday as you are. He's someone that I have just outside of the first round, but he's been ridiculous this year, shooting 43% from three, one of the best spot-up shooters or catch-and-shoot guys in college basketball, has stepped into that starting role in a terrific manner. So he is certainly someone that I'm higher on. I'm a little bit less high on Jalen Adams just because, I don't know that he's proven against high enough level competition on a consistent basis yet. And so I think it'll be a really interesting test to see him play Aaron Holiday, I guess, on Tuesday night. That's probably actually one of the opening round games that I'm most interested in, including all of the round of 62 stuff or whatever, round of 64 stuff.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Jalen Adams, for me, the reason I like him is that he can make plays off the dribble, basically pulling up at any time. He can pull up off the dribble at any time, and he has a lightning quick release despite his size. He can also really pass the ball. He doesn't turn the ball over a ton. He is a guy that I can see advanced analytics folks really liking because he's great just about across the board.
Yeah, I think that's probably true.
UCLA as well. Are you a Tom Welsh guy?
He's fine. He's someone who I think should get a shot given that he's able to space the floor and he's added that three-point shot to his game this season.
Yeah, I'm a big Tom Welsh guy. He's maybe the greatest human being in college basketball. I genuinely don't think I've ever met a nicer human being than Tom Welsh. He also knocks down 41% of his threes at 7 feet tall, 250 pounds. Really, really has improved as a defensive rebounder, 25.4 defensive rebounding rate. And that held up when I saw him go against DeAndre Ayton, who is probably the best rebounder in college basketball. He dropped a 17-17 night against DeAndre Ayton.
Yeah, that'll certainly play. He's someone who I think is at least worthy of getting some opportunities this summer.
Yeah, I mean, Chris Wilkes as well. I think Chris Wilkes is probably a year away. I think Jalen Adams might be 3 years away. Beyond that, though, I would say those are the two big ones to watch there. Florida as well. Florida is going to be interesting just because Chris Chiozza is really going to cause problems for whatever point guard in that matchup gets through to Florida.
Yes.
Kayvon Allen has been a little bit worse than what everyone expected this year. Igor Kulichev has been a little bit better than what everyone expected this year, though. They got on a slight run to end the year, but they're still so hit or miss. They're either going to go to the Elite Eight or they're going to lose in the first round.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. They're a team that I think has the potential to win this game and then beat Texas Tech if their shots are falling, because the thing that Texas Tech does is force you into taking really difficult shots, and Florida takes difficult shots anyways. And sometimes those shots go in, and if they go in, they're probably going to beat Texas Tech, and if they don't, they're certainly going to get run out of the gym. And so, I don't really have any idea what's going to happen with Florida, but it'll be fun to watch and find out.
Texas Tech against Stephen F. Austin. Let's talk about Zaire Smith real quick. Are you in on the Zaire Smith train that seems to be leaving the station?
Yeah, I think I'm on the bandwagon. He's so fun. He's like probably one of the most fun players in college basketball this year. There are flashes of moments where you can see some offensive skill start to develop, whether it's a pull-up jumper off the dribble or a straight line drive. He's a bouncy athlete, a terrific defender, super athletic, and really long. I think I'm on board.
Yeah, I'm on board with him. I have him at like 30 on my board right now. If he wanted to leave to go to the NBA, he would need to exceed what he's done offensively this year in workouts, I think. Like, if he was to go to the NBA right now, he'd probably be, one of the 5 worst offensive players in the league, right? Something like that?
Yeah, that's probably about right, yeah.
But he's a really, really good defender. He's an athlete that is worth taking the time to develop, I think. And when that is the case, you can probably rationalize using a first-round pick on him as high as, like, 24, 23.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Do you have any affinity for Keenan Evans as a potential NBA player?
Not really. Does get to the foul line a ton. Knocks down his foul shots. He's a really tough finisher inside. I don't really see enough playmaking, and I don't see enough three-point shooting. And the shot is funky as well.
Yeah, the shot is certainly not good. I think that he's going to get an opportunity, obviously, over the summer just because of how good he is off the bounce and getting to the rim. But I don't know that he is someone who will make a roster.
Yeah, I mean, like, he's going to be a second-team All-American, probably. And anytime you're that, you're going to get a look, you know?
Yep.
And he certainly earned that look, but he's not... It would not surprise me if he's in my top 100 by the time, like, everyone decides to declare and not declare for the draft, but he's not someone that I can see being selected in the draft either.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Stephen F. Austin, I don't really think that there's much to say about that game. I mean, TJ Holyfield is athletic at least, but like I don't really see anything else that's worth talking about.
I agree.
I think Texas Tech's probably going to give them some real problems. Arkansas against Butler. Arkansas has a few guys I'm actually pretty interested in from an NBA perspective. I would say probably Daniel Gafford is at number 12 on my board right now. I have Daryl Macon right on the edge of the top 100, and I have Jalen Barford like right on the edge of the top 100.
Yeah, that sounds about right in all instances. I think in the board that I released, I had Gafford number 11. I wrote about him a week or two ago and kind of really fell in love with his potential to be the rim-running, shot-blocking center out of this class. I think he is kind of all of the things that people want Robert Williams to be in that regard. He's a great lob finisher. He's now thrown down multiple windmill dunks in transition this year, and he's a terrific shot blocker and plays hard on every possession.
Yeah, I think that last thing that you mentioned is the key. He actually plays hard. Anytime that you actually play hard, that's going to be the most fun and most enticing thing for me is like a rim running, shot blocking 5 who can maybe defend on the perimeter. We'll see how much he can actually do that. It'll be an interesting matchup to see him go against Tyler Wideman because Wideman can really cause you all sorts of problems post scorer. Wouldn't surprise me to see Gafford in some foul trouble there, but if he actually succeeds against Wideman, I think that would say a lot to me.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And he does have a tendency to foul.
Yeah, and you know, Kamar Baldwin against Jalen Barford in all likelihood is going to be a really fun matchup too. Baldwin had just a ridiculous game against Seton Hall in the Big East tournament. He dropped 32 points, had 3 assists, was finishing from all sorts of crazy angles. That's going to be a really fun game or a game within the game, I guess, because both those guys are very, very athletic. They're a little bit undersized, but you just see the way that they attack the game. It's going to be fun to see them go at each other consistently.
Right, a couple of guys who can kind of create their own shots and get to their spots when they want to get to their spots. I think that'll be interesting. This is one of the more exciting games of the first round in my mind.
Yeah, I agree with you. Keelan Martin, as well as someone that we probably need to talk about a little bit. 6'7", 220 pounds, kind of a small ball 4, 36% from 3. Probably not a top 100 guy for me, though.
Probably not a top 100 guy, but is someone who will have his shot.
Yeah, he'll get a chance for sure. The number 2 team in that region is Purdue. Purdue against Cal State Fullerton. I saw Fullerton in the first game of their year against USC where they got blown out by 43. One thing that they do well, though, is that they get to the foul line. I can see that probably not working against Purdue, given the fact that Purdue limits opponent opportunities to get to the foul line. But historically, that is something that has succeeded in terms of upset potential.
Yeah, it seems unlikely in this instance that will happen. I think Purdue probably just has too much offense, even if Fullerton's able to get to the foul line. So not an upset that I would be picking at all.
But I am excited about Arkansas-Purdue in the next round. That might be the game. Yes. I am maybe not the game I'm most excited about because Colin Sexton might end up playing Villanova, and we'll talk about that in a second. But Daniel Gafford against Isaac Haas is going to be a blast if that happens.
It would be really awesome. In that game, I would hope that Arkansas would be more willing to put Gafford in ball screens. They tend to post him up too much for my liking, and I think that the way to take advantage of Purdue is to put Isaac Haas in ball screens. So I think that would be most interesting in another situation where Gafford would have to defend in the post without fouling.
Yeah, I think I think Arkansas's athleticism as a team would really cause a lot of problems for Purdue as well. Purdue does have guys in Dakota Mathias and Isaac Haas and Carson Edwards and Vince Edwards, but they lack like a certain level of athleticism, I think. They're very, very skilled. They can knock down shots. They're very disciplined offensively, but, I mean, you throw them against athletes and it gets tough for them.
Yeah, I mean, we saw what happened against Kansas in the NCAA tournament last year. Kansas just put them in ball screens with a lot better athletes, and Purdue stood no chance.
And Tennessee even caused them problems earlier this year. Tennessee just is smaller and more athletic. They're just as long as you have a level of toughness to deal inside with Isaac Haas, I can see you causing them problems. I actually have Arkansas winning that game, which is
nice.
Maybe a little bit bananas, but nonetheless, I'm excited. Villanova against Colin Sexton. Let's talk about that potential real quick. There's also a couple other potential matchups that could happen here that are exciting. Jalen Brunson trying to guard Colin Sexton would not be fun for Jalen Brunson.
It would go really badly for him. I was going to say the exact same thing. He would not stand a chance. I would be very interested to see whether or not Villanova would try something else in terms of guarding Sexton in that matchup.
I would bet they try and do their zone three-quarter court press where they get Mikal Bridges at the top of that diamond kind of thing and just let him guard Colin Sexton. I think that's almost what you have to do. Out. Maybe Phil Booth.
Yeah, probably. Those would both be reasonable options, but they're just otherwise not going to stand a chance in terms of containing Sexton. The good news for them in terms of actually winning that game is that Sexton going off doesn't mean a ton because the rest of Alabama doesn't necessarily score enough, but it would certainly be an interesting challenge for Villanova to figure out how to guard him.
Landry Shamet against Javon Carter is a matchup in San Diego that I might get a chance to see over the weekend. I'm excited to see those two because, Shamet is skinny but very, very skilled and tries hard defensively. Javon Carter is not hyper skilled, not hyper athletic, but the ultimate try hard. I would be fascinated to see the way that matchup would go down.
I think it would be super awesome to see that matchup. That's probably the individual prospect matchup that I would be most excited to watch in this region. I think that watching Javon Carter defend some of these other high-level point guards, be it Trae Young, Devontae Graham, all the guards he got to battle in the Big 12 conference, and getting to see him do that against Landry Shamet would be awesome.
Yeah, and then Texas Tech's athleticism against Florida's athleticism would be a lot of fun. There are a lot of really underrated fun matchups in this one. I think Villanova would probably just cause too many issues offensively for both Wichita and West Virginia, who both I think kind of have overrated defenses. Arkansas I think could cause a lot of problems athletically for teams. Florida can cause problems athletically. UCLA is good too. I'm excited for that region.
Yeah, I think that region's going to be really fun. I like Villanova out of that region just because I think Villanova's the best team, but I think that there's a lot of potential for craziness in there.
Final region here. Let's move on to the Midwest. I'm sorry I have to make you talk about Kansas, Chris. I'm very sorry.
It's okay. It's a rough life.
They're going to get upset by Penn. The best 16 seed ever. Just thoughts.
Yeah, it's going to be painful. I am unprepared. It's all dependent on whether or not Udoka Azubuike is healthy, and we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, no, they're not going to get upset. I think that everyone's making a bigger deal out of this than it is. Everyone's talking about the upset, and it's not going to happen. Seton Hall against NC State. kind of like a bunch of non-prospects in this game, but it'll be fun to watch from like a college basketball perspective.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think that the most exciting thing about that game is that whoever advances could potentially cause some interesting issues for Kansas in the next round.
I agree with you. And one point that I want to make here that's going to be interesting, at least like from the fringes of an NBA draft perspective, is that Omer Yurtseven has really added the three-point jumper this year, 51% from three. I can see him causing some issues for Angel Delgado in space.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I imagine that he's just going to be put in a pick-and-pop game and put Angel Delgado into having to guard on the perimeter, and I don't know that that's going to go well.
Yeah, no, Kevin Keats is going to do a good job, as he always does, because Kevin Keats is a really good basketball coach. Clemson against New Mexico State, another kind of non-prospect game for me. Maybe if you're high on Marquise Reed, you can make the case for him.
Yeah, I suppose, but I'm not. So,
he's a good college player.
We did say the Tennessee matchup might be the least interesting one from a prospect perspective. It might actually be this game.
Yeah, probably. I mean, Jamario Jones is like a really fun player. He has the best defensive rebounding rate in the country, despite being 6'5". That seems impossible.
He rips off 20 rebound games like it's nothing.
Yeah, and like Zach Lofton is okay. And like AJ Harris is a former high major player that starts at point guard for them, but this is going to be a slog. Like I will almost guarantee you, I bet the under hard while I'm sitting watching this game in San Diego.
Yeah, that seems reasonable.
Auburn versus Charleston, another kind of non-prospecty game for me. Auburn at least has some like pseudo potential pro players, like Mustafa Heron probably would be in my top 100 if he would declare for the draft. Jared Harper and Bryce Brown are interesting quick guards. Beyond that, though, I mean, maybe you could make the case for Anthony McLemore as a shot blocker, but he's 6'7".
Yeah, I was going to say Anthony McLemore is at least someone who is interesting to me prior to getting injured, just given some of the stuff that he does at his particular size. But I'm with you on a lot of fringe guys here, but nobody who really sticks out.
Yeah, I mean, maybe Chuma Okeke, like down the road a little bit. Like he shot 41% from three at 6'8", 230 pounds. Decent offensive and defensive rebounder. He's fine. Like maybe long term, that's the play here. I mean, Charleston has at least a couple of like interesting low major players like Joe Cheely and Grant Riller. Grant Riller is a 42% 3-point shooter this year. Joe Cheely can really create off the bounce, but like I'm not there on any of these dudes.
Yeah, I agree. Super interesting team from a college basketball perspective. Remember, they gave Wichita State an early run way back when and then lost by 18 points because Wichita State pulled away late. But that's about all you get out of Charleston.
TCU against Arizona State and Syracuse. Arizona State-Syracuse is maybe one of the weirdest matchups from an NBA draft perspective and from a college basketball perspective because Arizona State's going to try and run, and Syracuse is going to say no.
Yeah, I mean, Arizona State's going to take like 53s in this game over the top of the zone, and whether or not they go in will be the decider. Yeah,
and also like both of those teams are not good. So
nope.
Yeah, no, like they both kind of suck actually. So I'm not excited for that. Tyus Battle is the most interesting prospect in this game. He's played a higher percentage of his team's minutes this year than anyone in the country at 96% of Syracuse's minutes. They literally can't take him off the floor without falling apart. I mean, he's interesting to me as a 6'6" guy who in high school showed the ability to defend a little bit, showed the ability to pass a little bit, but he doesn't really get a chance to do any of that here.
Yeah, pretty much all he does in college is get to the rim at a high rate and shoot a ton of threes. And that's interesting, I guess. But he's not so. He's someone who has slid down my board consistently over the course of the year.
Yeah, like he'll be in the 40 range for me probably. O'Shea Brissett, long term, is interesting, but his numbers are also inflated by playing just 1 billion minutes. Yeah, I'm like he's shooting 35% from three. He's at least comfortable taking them. He's a year away, I think, though. Like he's not for this draft.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Arizona State, there's no one really there that you're interested in, right? Like maybe Trey Holder.
Yeah, maybe Trey Holder just because of his ability to create his own shot and get shots up off the dribble, but otherwise there's not really anything that is particularly interesting.
And then TCU, I am a big Kenrich Williams guy. I will say that. I'm not as big a Kenrich Williams guy as our good friend Cole Zwicker is, but I do like Kenrich Williams.
I also like Kenrich Williams. He knows how to play the basketballs, can shoot a little bit, can pass it a little bit, can defend it a little bit. Those are all great things to have, and he does it at a size that makes him a bit of a versatile defender. So certainly someone who I think will get a look once he graduates this spring.
Would not surprise me if he was a top 70 player on my board by the time everyone was done. Like I think that he probably will be, to be honest. Sneaky one, Desmond Bain as well, 68% true shooting percentage, 47% from three. Right on the borderline of my top 100 all year. Does have the negative wingspan, which scares me, but he's also like just strong as shit too.
Yeah, he's huge, just from a physical perspective, and is a big-time shot maker. So he's definitely someone who I think could play his way into the NBA draft discussion.
Yeah, and like Vlad Brodzianski, I guess, is someone that you have to pay attention to as a 6'11" guy who can kind of shoot and who is like hyper skilled, but he doesn't rebound at all, doesn't defend really at all. So I'm probably not as high on him. Again, not a super interesting matchup there. 6'11", TCU and Syracuse probably. Maybe if Tyus Battle is defended by Kenrich Williams at times in that game, like that's the most interesting one, right?
Yeah, I think that's probably right.
Michigan State and Bucknell. We'll talk about Michigan State later on, just because I think we're going to be really excited to talk about Duke Michigan State at some point. But let's talk about Rhode Island and Oklahoma. That's a really, really fun, underrated matchup, I think, because Jared Terrell is going to get after Trae Young and really frustrate him. And if you've ever seen Jared Terrell in person, he is a massive, like 6'1" human being.
Yes, I'm really pumped for that matchup. That may be one of the better individual matchups of the opening weekend. He's going to cause Trae Young some problems, and I think we're going to find out really quickly about whether or not Trae Young's it's fatigue excuse is real, because he's had a week off. He should be in position to have a big game. And if he doesn't have a big game for all similar reasons to, what's happened over the last 6 weeks where he's just been missing shots, I think that'll give us some clarity on who he is as a prospect.
Yeah, I think I agree with you there. Anyone else in this matchup? Like E.C. Matthews is someone that people were excited about early in his career, but I haven't really seen reason to continue to be excited about him.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I mean, this is clearly a Trae Young show where Trae Young's going to play against a really good college backcourt, and it's going to give us some clarity on, kind of how ready he is physically for the rigors of the NBA.
Duke versus Iona is going to be a really fun stylistic matchup too. Tim Kluse is a really, really smart coach who will try and push the pace as much as he can. Deshaun Much, Shadrick Casimir, Ricky McGill, that's a really, really good backcourt as well that I can see causing some issues for Duke. At the end of the day, though, I'd be pretty surprised if this one didn't get controlled by Duke.
Yeah, I was going to say one team has Marvin Bagley and the other team does not.
Yeah, and Iona just doesn't have anyone to really even compare to Marvin Bagley. Like, they play like guys that are 6'7" is their tallest guy. I think their tallest starter is like EJ Griffin at 6'6", or EJ Crawford. I'm sorry, I mixed him and the other guy Griffin that they play too.
Yeah,
they don't do much for me.
I agree.
So, yeah, that's also going to be a big Wendell Carter day, too. But let's talk about the Duke-Michigan State matchup. That's probably the one that everyone is hoping for in the entire NCAA tournament, right?
Yeah, I mean, from a prospect perspective, that's certainly the best one that's possible, I think. You get the opportunity to see them play with Marvin Bagley. He only played 10 minutes in their opening round, or their Champions Classic game earlier in the season. So we get an opportunity to see him play kind of one-for-one with Jaren Jackson Jr., which I think would be really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like there's a bit of a rising tide for Jaren Jackson ahead of Marvin Bagley. And I've had them at 3-4 on my board for over a month or so now, and I have Marvin Bagley ahead. I think he's just a better athlete. I think he creates more, just generally creates more havoc with his athleticism, but I get the case for Jaren Jackson.
Yeah, I moved Jackson ahead of Bagley on my latest big board. A large portion of it is just that I think that Jackson's developed a little bit more skill-wise over the course of the season than Bagley has. Jackson's flashing more of an ability to attack in straight line drives and do a little bit of the isolating on the perimeter and handling the ball a little bit. Whereas I don't necessarily know that Bagley showed some of those same skill progressions, but like you said, Bagley is just such a tremendous athlete and has the ability to take games over that way. that it matters a ton.
Yeah, and then you get Wendell Carter in that mix as well. And Wendell Carter is a ridiculous prospect in his own right, and he'll get matched up with a smart defender like Gavin Schilling or a really big physical guy like him in Nick Ward. Those are really fun matchups that could tell us a lot about Wendell Carter too.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, him battling on the boards with Nick Ward will be tremendous.
And, imagine if they go small. You could see Wendell Carter matched up on Jaren Jackson with Miles Bridges and Marvin Bagley, breaking the world with athleticism.
That would be terrific, but we know that Tom is restricted to only playing 2 big men this season.
They've been doing it a little bit more. They've been playing small a little bit more. Are you in on the Grayson Allen resurgence?
I think that Grayson Allen has an NBA-level skill in terms of his shooting. He can do it off movement. He can do it off the dribble a little bit, but he does very little else.
I think Gary Trent is a better prospect than him.
I don't know if that's a hot take, yeah. I mean, Trent is younger, shoots it just as well, has the ability to... I think maybe the separator here in my mind is that Grayson has the ability to play make a little bit more than Gary Trent does.
That's true. I mean, you could never play Gary Trent at point guard. They can play Grayson at point guard from time to time, but also Gary Trent is 2 to 3 inches taller.
Sure, that's true.
So, I don't know. We'll see what happens with the Grayson Allen saga. I mean, do you have any hot takes on the butt trip?
I'm all in on the butt trip. It was my favorite thing to happen. It was so good. We had the butt trip and the butt towel. Just a really great weekend for butts. Yeah,
I mean, what are we doing here, Grayson? I will say this too, though. If that's anyone else, it's really not a big deal.
No, but it was just so obvious, and it was Grayson, that it just had to be a big deal.
He's really bad at making that shit obvious. There are players...
He looked backwards. He looked over his shoulder.
Yeah, there are guys who can do it and do it sneakily and kind of, make it work. He is not one of those dudes, not only just because everyone, is watching him, but also because he's really bad at making it obvious.
Yes. He has the guilty face every time he does something bad.
Yeah. I mean, how Michigan State's backcourt matches up with those two, and how, I guess we haven't even mentioned Trayvon Duval yet. Do we want to?
He's interesting, I guess. He's been playing a little bit better lately, more controlled in the half court, but he still makes way too many dumb decisions. If you have the double 20s, if you have a 20% turnover rate and a 20% 3-point percentage, or in the 20s in those, that's a problem. And Trayvon Duval's at 23.4 turnover rate, 27% 3-point percentage. It's really, really hard to do anything in the NBA if that's going to be your combination. I agree. I guess that's the one that's the most exciting, but Kansas, I guess, against either of those teams, all perimeter attack versus all big men inside in both those cases. Those would be really interesting matchups to me, at least. Yeah, I think that would be fun basketball games. Marvin Bagley would absolutely destroy Kansas's front line in just every way possible because Svi Mikhailiuk would have to guard him, and that would go very badly. God, I hope I get to watch Svi guarding him. They'd put LeGerald on him, wouldn't they? I mean, maybe, but that's not going to go any better. That's true. And Michigan State, you'd have one of those guys guarding Jaren Jackson, probably? Yes. Yes, you would. Oh, boy. Give me a Final Four, Chris. Duke, Gonzaga, Virginia, Villanova. Okay, that's my 4 as well. I'm very scared by the fact that everyone on The Athletic, including myself, has a Virginia-Villanova final, and I don't like that. That's a little bit weird. Just to make it interesting, I'd take Gonzaga over Virginia, and I think Villanova will win the title. Okay, so I've got Virginia winning the title. That would be a not very interesting setup from a prospect perspective. I mean, it'd be okay, but there are much better teams that could get through from a prospect perspective. I think as long as Villanova makes the Final Four, you're going to end up with an interesting prospect perspective on that side of the bracket, assuming that one of Kansas, Michigan State, or Duke makes it through. I think, like we said, the West is just so bereft of draft prospects that it makes that side of the bracket really difficult. Yeah, it does. Chris, tell the people where they can find your work. You can find my work on Sporting News and FanSided, a little bit on Rush the Court, and you can always find it on Twitter at CStoneHoops. Chris is one of my favorite people in the business. Go follow him at his variety of locations. This has been the Game Theory Podcast. We were sponsored by RX Bar. If you remember that ad about an hour ago, not sure if you do, but we'll be back later on this week. We're going to talk about
some interesting NBA draft, nitty-gritty stuff with Coles Wicker at some point, I'm sure. But until next time, we'll talk soon. Bye.